What can you do to prevent frostbite and hypothermia? What are some gear choices that you need to make for extreme cold weather conditions? And what are some tips that you can use to win the next season of Alone? Hey, my name is Teimojin, and I am a doctor, veteran, and finalist from Alone Season 9. And welcome to my live series where I will be reviewing episodes from Alone Season 10, adding my 2 cents, and opening up the floor to your questions. So if you have any burning questions, feel free to leave it in the comments with the topic and your question. So whether you're a family of whether you're a fan of the show, interested in survival, or even better, the science behind survival, this series is for you. Every week, I'll be hosting these lives, and moving forward, we'll be taking current events, accidents, videos that you think are interesting, and breaking down the medical components and their survival components of those videos. So feel free to put those links in the comments, to reach out to me on direct message or by email, and we'll get those videos up for you on a weekly basis. 15 minutes of live education and then opening up the floor to your questions. So super excited for that. And for you to get onto those lives, all you need to do is subscribe, click that notification, and check out the community tab because I have an erratic schedule. So it's not always at the same day every single week, but I will try to do it every single week for you guys. So without further ado, let's talk about Alone Season 10, Episode 11, the finale. And for those of you who have seen episodes 8 till now, let me know what you thought because there was a little bit of a gap in my schedule. I didn't get to watch all the episodes, but I've been tagged with things like Wyatt's wound care and was that an abscess? Could he have gone sepsis? And all sorts of questions that are super, super interesting for me to dive into and also to explain to you guys. But number one, few things that came on was about equipment. So I'm super excited. My place is littered with a gear that I brought to Alone, gear that I wish were legal on the show, and things you might want to consider if you're going on the show or just hanging out in extreme cold weather. So let's dive into the episode 11, the finale, and go over some things that I thought were pretty interesting. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we'll go from there. All right, so we see that Mikey at the very beginning is eating snow. So, what have you guys heard about eating snow? Is snow dangerous for you to eat if you are dehydrated? And there are some differencing of opinions. So, number one, can it reduce your core temperature? To some degree, yes. Does it require energy to heat up because it's not room temperature? Yes. Do we know the exact calculation of how many calories that burns? Maybe not super accurately. But one thing that I noticed kind of throughout these three contestants and throughout most of the seasons that I've seen, including my own season, is how are we going to process large amount of water without going large distances and burning a lot of calories to get that water? And we see one strategy is to eat snow directly. Now, ideally, and one of the reasons why this was not recommended by the military specifically was people were getting cold injuries to their lips and mucosa, so the inside of their lips and their mouth. So getting frostbite in that area or frost injury is not the best for you long term, especially if you do get that big game, if you do have a meal and your face and your mouth is so sensitive that you don't want to eat. Um, that's one of the downfalls of eating snow directly. But one thing that you can do is you can put it around a material. So whether that's a cotton material, whether that's part of your shamag, part of your bandana, part of your clothing that you don't really use. For me, I had extra large of a lot of different things. So I had a lot of more material. So what you can do is put the snow in there and then you can suck on it. That is similar to why you put ice packs in a cloth. So you're not having that direct cold injury and that protects it somewhat. And that warmth from your mouth can melt it and you can suck on that water. One even better tip, and since most people over here do have fires inside their shelters, is having a big water harvesting unit. So we're in a temperature right now. I think the coldest that I've seen on the screen for episode 11 was 0 degrees Fahrenheit, so around minus 20 Celsius, and that's not including the wind chill. So I imagine anywhere from minus 20 Celsius to minus 30 Celsius is what these people have been seeing. So what you can do is there's snow on the ground. You can take your second pair of t-shirt or cloth and make a huge ball of snow. So as much snow as you can put into that shirt and just close up all the holes. And once that's in there, you make a tripod inside your shelter. preferably near your fire, maybe 3 or 4 feet above it, with your collecting pot under that. And what that does is the heat from your shelter melts that big old material of snow, and that drips the water down without you having to do a whole lot. So you don't have to commute all the way to the lakefront to collect that water. You don't have to risk slipping. You don't have to risk falling into that water as well. So that's one nice way to do that when you're trying to harvest. And melting snow typically is a lot of volume to get very little actual water because it is more spacious than water. So if you're thinking of that, you're going to need a lot more than what you think just for that 2 quart pot. And if you find a nice source of ice, that's an option too. You can melt the ice, but again, you're using your fire. All righty. So moving on, we see that they're talking about the stages of hypothermia. And I wanted to touch on this very interestingly, specific to the alone experience. We were talking about guys who are and girls who are out there for a prolonged amount of time with a calorie deficit. Once those fat stores are gone, once those calories from berries, protein, and so forth are limited, there's not a whole lot in your bloodstream in regards to glucose. And typically, that's your go to energy source. So your shiver response can be blunted, if not absent, in starvation. So it's not the best marker for staging hypothermia. One thing that I love doing in staging hypothermia when you don't have those special thermometers that go all the way back in your throat, or rectal thermometers, or anything that helps you gauge how severe the hypothermia is, a good marker is, are they cold plus having mental status changes? So are they confused? Are they babbling? Are they talking like they're drunk? Are they walking like they're drunk? Because if there's any kind of motor function imbalance or kind of cognition changes, that tells me it's cold enough for the brain to be affected. And I would classify that in the moderate to severe realm, and I would treat it similarly. So for mild hypothermia, you want to be thinking about going into a shelter, changing out of wet clothes if you can, drinking warm, high calorie fluids, and getting that core as warm as possible. Now, with moderate to severe hypothermia, we've seen this in the past. We've seen it as soon as episode or series 8, I believe. Yep. So series 8 or season 8 of Alone, there was someone who went into the water and it was cold and she was talking funny and she was kind of not having the best balance. So I would classify that as closer to moderate hypothermia. So instead of relying on shiver response to grade your hypothermia, in survival situations, I would also really focus on the mental status changes because the way you treat it is different. And we're going to go into all the equipment that you can use for an improvised rewarming in the field, because a lot of what I chose for my gear selection was geared towards, okay, I think GI issues are going to be an issue. So that's why I had my emergency medical. It wasn't only a nutritional ration, a medical ration, and the type of clothing and sleeping bags and gear that I had. So I'm really excited to dive into that. All right, we have some questions here. Keep it coming, guys, because we will answer that as soon as this little review is over. And another thing that I noticed, and Mikey, if you ever watch this or if people know Mikey and know his sleeping bag, let me know in the comments or reach out to me via DM. This sleeping bag looks like a rectangular sleeping bag. So a few things that I brought for you guys today, excuse me, is the different types of sleeping bags that I carry that I recommend. And it doesn't have to be super expensive, but look for these characteristics. So number one, over here, we see kind of like a rectangular type of setup. A lot of these bags that are rectangular don't have a dedicated hood. So number one, making sure that you have a dedicated hood, because you lose a lot of heat from your neck, from your scalp. You got big blood vessels over here, and your scalp actually emits a lot of moisture and also heat. So it's good that he's wearing a hat. It's good that he's wearing a balaclava or a neck warmer. But all that sleeping bag that's open, that's not cinched in around the neck, all that heat that is generating inside that sleeping bag is leaving. So the efficiency of your sleeping system is diminished exponentially. And one of the things that I would highly recommend is that your sleeping bag, look for baffles. So baffles are extra padding around the neck and around the inside where the zippers are. So it prevents air from coming in. So if it's baffled around the neck, baffled on the zippered side, that's super well insulated. Now I have a down sleeping bag over here. So super floofy. This is what I brought on Alone season 9. So this is from from, I think, Mountain Hardware, I believe. The Phantom series, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 40 degrees Celsius. Now, the thing that you want to be looking for, is it a wet and cold environment, or is it a wet, or is it a cold and dry environment? If it's cold and dry, typically your go-to is down feathers. If it's kind of wet and cold, you got to be thinking about synthetic in case your bag gets wet. Now, if you guys want to learn the details on equipment and characteristics and all that stuff, check out survivaldoctors.com. I have a free survival guide that's coming up. You can see a few of the initial chapters, and that's all free. So check that out if you want the details on what to look for gear. And in addition to that, some of the newer models, especially the down-filled sleeping bag models, kind of has a workaround for that concern of wet environments. Number one, the fill. The fill is the biggest concern because if down feathers get wet, they clump together, they lose their loft, their fluffiness, and it's really hard to dry. Some companies go around that by creating a hydrophobic layer on top of the feathers. So they spray it with a chemical or solution that makes it so that water beads off those feathers, just like a regular duck or something like that. So that makes it a little more resistant to those moisture and dampness. And second thing, and this is what my sleeping bag had, is it has a Gore-Tex layer as well. Now, is that enough to guarantee that it doesn't get damp on the inside? I wouldn't put my money on it. Ideally, and this is something that I wish Alone would allow as included in your sleeping system, is including a Gore-Tex bivy bag on top of that, because not only does it protect your sleeping bag, it retains a lot of heat, and in addition to that, it weatherproofs it too. So I always have a Gore-Tex bag if I can, if I'm allowed to, over my sleeping system, whether that's in the summer or in the winter. Other sleeping bags over here is this is a synthetic sleeping bag. So synthetics are great for wet and cold environments because even though they do get some moisture or wet, you can wring them out, dry them more easily, and they maintain their loft, their fluffiness. Now, their fluffiness, on average, for your average synthetic sleeping bag that's graded to similar levels. So my synthetic sleeping bag is actually graded to minus 60. And I would say that it is not as warm as my minus 40 down sleeping bag. And that has to do with loft, but also has to do with design. Again, this manufacturer is super affordable, great for like car camping, is a little bulkier and heavier, but it doesn't have a dedicated hood. So you're basically cinching up a rectangle, and it doesn't really have significant baffles around the neck. So a lot of that heat is leaving. So not the best. And another thing that I want to show you in this image is sleeping with your jacket, sleeping with your equipment. Is that a good thing? Can you be warmer if you sleep with your equipment, especially your parka? Or is that going to be what gets you more cold? Now, depending on what sleeping bag you have, if it is a really undergraded sleeping bag, you might have to bolster that sleeping system with additional clothes. But if your sleeping bag is graded to minus 40, minus 60, and without your equipment, typically it would stay warm. What you're doing is actually insulating your sleeping bag from your body's heat. So how a sleeping bag would work is it retains the heat that's inside that sleeping bag. But if it can't even capture that heat because you're wearing multiple layers, you're wearing your parka, and that heat never escapes those inner layers, your sleeping bag isn't accumulating that heat and retaining it. So ideally, what I would do if my sleeping bag was not necessarily the warmest, and this is what I did on season 9 as well, is my extra clothing, I bolstered up my padding. So anything that I didn't wear regularly, I had some sweaters, some pants. I used that as an extra sleeping bag. So on the inside of my sleeping bag, I layered it down on the inside of on the ground, so that even though that I was up 2 feet plus off the ground, had at least about a foot and a half of insulation with boughs. I still wanted that extra insulation. And in addition to that, anything that I wasn't using, my sweater, I used more as a blanket and less so as something that I wrapped around myself and put the sleeves in and all that. One thing that happens very quickly, and this typically happens the moment you fall asleep, is that you can sweat just a wee bit, and that little wee bit, number one, creates a layer that can freeze overnight especially if your sleeping bag isn't warm enough, and number two, can affect the R value of your clothing. So if your base layer, your mid layer, your parka, all of that has a significant amount of moisture, it will not be as warm. And to go to an extent of, okay, how important is this? It's so important when we're training for Arctic warfare in the Canadian military, our parka stays outside. So it stays outside because all the moisture that developed throughout the day from our sweat and so forth stays outside. It freezes, so you can shake it off in the morning. The reason why we don't like bringing it inside our tent is because we have our fire going, we're cooking, there's moisture there from sweat, from the boiling water that goes into our clothing, and it stays there, and it's quite hard to dry, even though you have a fire inside. So ideally, you would not want to sleep with your clothing. Now let's go back to how do we make our sleeping bag even warmer if it's not the best. So sleeping bag selection. Number two, not having excessive amount of layers that insulates your sleeping bag from your actual body heat. And number three, let's generate some heat on the inside. So one thing that Kevin always mentions, and his kind of a big commenter on this channel, is having some kind of heating system on the inside of the sleeping bag. You can very easily take one of the rocks that are dry. You don't want to have wet rocks that are around your fireplace. And if that's kind of warmed after your fire is done, or if you're done cooking and it's just off to the side and it's kind of warm enough to feel slightly hot to the touch, but not enough to burn you or scald you, you can wrap that in a thin layer of cotton or wool. I had wool with me, and you can put it on the inside of your sleeping bag. Put it on your chest because that's the same area that I would recommend people with moderate to severe hypothermia for field rewarming. So you have your sleeping bag, everything cinched in, your head's covered, everything except your mouth is covered, and you put that nice warm rock in the middle of your chest. Another nice option, and this is more for comfort and less for hypothermia management in the field, is our toes. Our toes are always one of the most cold things when we go into our sleeping bag. You can take that rolled rock, that warm rock that's in the cotton or wool, put it on the bottom of our sleeping bag and allow that to heat up the sleeping bag. Now, you do have to play with it because, again, if you're too hot in your sleeping bag, you sweat and then you can get cold. So really play with how much layers you're wearing in there. Typically, I go naked or just a base layer, and that was all up until the last moment of when I exited Alone Season 9. So you don't necessarily need all these layers in there to stay warm. You can use those other methods to bolster up the warmth on the inside. And I do like draping clothes over myself instead of wearing them. Because again, if you feel at any point there's a little bead of sweat, you want to wipe it off and make sure that everything is as dry as possible. One thing that I loved out there is this. So I took this shamog. It's basically an oversized scarf that's Irish wool. That's basically the size of a small blanket, and I use that over my body. And any time that I was sweating just a wee bit, it was that rag to wipe off the sweat, and it also added a little bit of a layer for warmth as well. So highly recommend adding some kind of inner liner to your sleeping system, whether that's a liner itself or I love these Irish wool shamogs. So really cool item. I've had it for years and super durable as well. All right, next one. He is amazing. Mikey's amazing at catching mice. He's caught 21, and I'm not sure if he's using the same setup where the trap system's on the top of his cooking pot, but he's great at doing it. One thing that I noticed in this image is number one, the type of boot that he's carrying, and also the type of gloves he chose. So on Alone, if you look at the publicly available list of items that you're allowed to carry, it'll show you the type of gloves or how many gloves that you're supposed to have. You got your working gloves, you got your other gloves. This might be a liner of a glove. I'm not sure if it's wool. I hope it's wool. I hope it's not cotton. But there's a bunch of holes in it, and I'm curious. A lot of these people are complaining of cold kind of sensations in their fingers and toes. I'm curious what their system is for their boots and their gloves, and I'm going to show you exactly what I use to make sure that my fingers and toes never get frostbite. So I'll talk about his boots in a little bit, but let's talk about gloves for a quick instant. So I had my working gloves, which was basically a cross country glove. So it's an insulated glove, well-known Canadian company. And if you want to know the things that I carry and things that I recommend in regards to gear, if there is a link for it, it's going to be in the description. And if it's not there, it's going to be at survivaldoctors.com/store. I chose for my outer mitt to be this guy. So this is sealskin with caribou kind of fur on the side and then wool on the inside. And it's about, I would say, half a centimeter thick of wool plus that sealskin. And I did this because some of the people who initially taught me a lot of what I know about cold weather survival were the Cree people. And this was kind of an homage to those people who've taught me. Now, this is water resistant, super warm, but I want to keep your eyes focused on the size. And I think WYATT had a big one like this as well. Now, what you want to make sure your fingers are always warm is kind of a multi-layered system, just like your sleeping bag, just like your clothing. You want to be able to also layer your finger wear. So this big mitt fit my insulated glove. So this is like my older one. The brand is Eau Claire, and I used one that was maybe a few models newer than this one, but still love this brand, this setup, and this plus something like this makes it so that I can go to -60, -70, -80, and this is without wind chill and not even feel the cold. So really like these setups, getting this oversized mitt, getting a nice quality insulated glove that has some leather so you can manage your fires with, and kind of layering it like that. And the cool thing about this one is from Sale, which is a Canadian equivalent of an REI. It also has these little zippers that you can go in and use your fingers if need be, and then just tuck it back in. So these are ice fishing gloves and really love them. So I get like the biggest size that I could possibly find, and then just get my regular gloves and make sure that it fits together loosely. So you don't want it tight or else you block circulation. Once you block circulation, you're blocking venous flow back from your extremity. So that's the cold blood coming back. And you're also blocking the arterial flow, the warm blood flowing in. So if cold blood's not coming back to get warmed up by your heart and the rest of your body, and the warm blood isn't getting to those fingers, toes, nose and ears and penis, those are the kind of the extremity points that are typically the most exposed and most vulnerable to cold injury, then you're going to have a problem. You're going to be at more risk for cold injuries. So layer not only everything, but also layer your glove systems. And next, I want to talk about MIKEY's boots. So awesome that we have these rubberized slash neoprene boots. I actually have a pair of mucks myself. So these are my Arctic mucks, and they're supposed to be good for -30. -30, it's mostly rubberized, and then it has some neoprene material, insulated material, and it feels about just maybe a touch less or a touch more than a centimeter in thickness. Now, I've tried this in the winter at -30, and it does keep your feet warm on day one. Now, what happens if you're hunting, if you're fishing, if you're doing anything active, and you're sweating, that moisture stays in that neoprene, and it is quite hard to dry out because of that rubber layer. I really like if you are going for that rubberized kind of boot in cold environments. WYATT has one that you have an insert on the inside that you can take out. At least you can try that. But sometimes that inside of that boot, even the rubber part, is sometimes hard to dry out. But at least you have that inner liner that you can take in and out and dry. Now I'm going to show you what I recommend for cold climates, and it is a trade-off. So these boots, these muck boots, these rubberized boots, great for fishing. But if you're not anticipating going kind of like ankle deep in water anyways, or if you're going to build something that doesn't necessarily cause you to do that, then you can go without it. And it's really dependent on the environment. Fish over here was a huge aspect. So not knocking any of these guys for taking that type of boot, but the caveat, the downside is that once those colder months hit, once day 60 comes around, and it's like minus 20, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, the potential of frostbite becomes a real situation. So for me, my ideal was not getting frostbite. If things get wet, I want a boot that I can dry out. So I'll start with what I brought for my everyday boot. So this was my fall up until the frost point. So up until the frost point, I carried this. So this is an Iris setter from um, Red Wing shoes, and it has a thin slate of 1,000 grams. So it is slightly insulated. You can see that mesh over here. It's kind of like a quilt. And on the outside, you can see it almost over here. It is layered with Gore-Tex as well. So there's some water resistance. I wouldn't call this a waterproof boot, and I wouldn't call it a winter boot as well. Once the frost hits, I would say that, especially in a starvation state and you need calories to stay warm, I wouldn't be mucking around in the snow for long periods of time with this. But is it a boot that is really good for hunting, gives you ankle support, is dryable? Yes, it is. And it is something that I still recommend to this day, still love wearing. And they have a great warranty. So if you go into a shop, they'll revamp the leather for you. So if it's all mucked up from a loan, you just bring it in and they revamp it. Funny story for this boot is that what I did on Alone season 9 every single day was dry out my stuff, including my boots. And typically, I would use the alder wood next to me. And alder, when it burns, some alders have a very nutty taste. So till this date, I think my boots like smell amazing. It kind of smells like a rich, nutty peanut butter mix. And I remember daydreaming about a peanut butter sandwich and like a peanut butter milkshake just by like smelling my socks and boots because of that combination of the leather and the alder. It just smelled delicious. And just smelling these, even though I've worn it since Alone season 9, it still smells like my shelter, which brings back a lot of good memories. So that's really nice. Now, when we're moving on to now let's move on to our winterized boots. So I didn't want to get frostbite. I didn't want any chance of getting frostbite. And this is the boot that I wore and recommended to all my friends. And what my military friends who train in the Arctic, operate in the Arctic, recommended to me is this Baffin Eiger. Now, the cool thing about this is it does have an inner liner. It is rubberized on the bottom, but it's not on the top. And that's purposely so for specifically cold environments that are more dry. So is it the best for wet environments? Not necessarily, but that breathable layer over here allows the moisture from your feet to evaporate and to go through the boot a little bit better instead of a completely rubberized boot. And it dries fairly easily too. Now, the cool thing about this is if you don't want to wear your snow pants, you don't necessarily have to because it has these built-in gaiters that go like just below the knee. It goes quite high up. So it's just this material that can fold up and then cinch down too. Now, one thing that I do like on these boot systems, and something that if your boot doesn't have this, if your mucklucks do not have this, consider adding this because it does add, again, that layered system to your boots and prevents frost injury or cold injury to your toes, is reflective layer, aeration layer, so it adds the cold gaps, and then some kind of insulated layer. So this insulated layer, I took your regular military kind of insoles for your mucklucks. I cut it in half and put one in each shoe and kind of layered it like that. So I had my reflective layer, I had my honeycomb layer, and then I had my insulated layer all together like that on the bottom of my shoe. And it's very cool because you can almost feel that radiant heat come back from your foot, almost like a non-electric heat warmer. So that's how I insulated it. I want to show you the Baffin Eiger inserts because if you compare it to your regular inserts, let's say your standard mucklucks, it's almost double the thickness. So these are the Baffin Eiger inserts, and the thickness over here, I would say it's almost 2 centimeters thick. So quite thick, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but this is almost reflective. It's a little less shiny because I've been drying it with smoke. But that reflective layer also reflects heat back to your foot. And this boot was so effective, even though it was minus 20, minus 30, until the final days of season 9. I was almost barefoot most days in these boots. That's how warm it was. It was so comfortable. I was wearing it like slippers. So, one thing I will say about the Baffin Igers is that you need to size up at least 2 sizes up. So, whether it's Amazon or a store, make sure that you can return it because you'll probably need to go 2, if not 3 sizes up because it is a little tightly fitting. All right, guys. So, you guys mentioned not seeing the screen. Hopefully, I can edit that out, but check this out. So, Baffin Igers, that's the insulated one. That's about 2 centimeters over here. The layers that I was talking about, reflective layer, honeycomb layer, and also an insulated wool layer. So this was about 2 times as thick, cut it right in the middle, and put one in each muckluck boot. Sorry if you didn't see some of that, but I'll show it right now. So this is, look at the just the fluffiness of the sleeping bag. So this is my minus 40 degrees Celsius sleeping bag. And even though I put this one, my synthetic bag, into the same bag, it won't fill the same amount. And this is a minus 60-degree bag. And again, this is more of a rectangular shape. And it doesn't necessarily have all the baffles that I wish it did have to go to minus 60. So I could probably survive in minus 60 with this bag, but I would not recommend it at minus 60. I'd probably stick to like minus 20 in this bag. Whereas the other one, I could probably go colder. And if you're like Juan Pablo and find a company that can do both, where you combine an inner down layer and an outer synthetic layer, whew, you're probably going to win. um, I do want to show the gloves again because I just realized that the screen was probably too small for you to see what was going on. So this is the sealskin glove that I brought to give homage to the Cree people who taught me my cold weather skills. So again, this is sealskin on the outside, which is water resistant, caribou liner over here, and then inner liner is about 1 centimeter of wool, super warm, and it fits my inner gloves too. So my inner gloves, like I mentioned, are typically cross country gloves because um, that's what I have experience using, and they're really warm, and they have a leather kind of palm to it. So I get my leather gloves over here, and I make sure I have an extra large mitt. So this is an ice fishing mitt from Sail, and I layer it just like that. Look how big that is. And it is loosely fitting. And the cool thing that I love about this mitt is you got the zipper over here, can use your fingers if needed, and then put it right on back. So this is the mitt that can get you to minus 60 and below. All right. Other things, socks. So socks is also something that you need to consider. Both of these are socks that I brought on a loan. You can see how gunky they kind of look, but again, they smell like my shelter, so I don't want to throw these away. These are just your regular wool socks. In the military, we have our regular wool socks and we have our Arctic thicker wool socks. I use just a regular wool sock for the first like 50 days. And because I was smoking them every day, dusting them out, I never really reached for my thick wool socks until like day 50 something because of how warm my boots were and because how I was taking care of my equipment as well. I had some of these just in case, but I actually use this majority to carry my berries in because these are wool thinner socks. Now, what you want to be doing if you want to make a thicker socks, but not restrict that blood flow, is you want to be getting something that fits just a touch loosely. So in the military, we have our synthetic layers, kind of like your dress sock type of deal. And then you have your wool socks. That helps with the friction, so you're not getting a whole lot of blisters, but it allows that wicking from your sweat to go from that synthetic layer to that wool layer and then to the boot. So socks, want to make sure that they're thick, wool or fleece. Wool is a little bit, in my opinion, more useful because you can also have it as a fire resistant layer, and also it makes a nice padding as well. Fleece, fire does not like fleece. It burns holes in it like crazy. I haven't seen a whole lot of fleece socks, but a lot of ski socks are synthetic and are quite warm. Now, the big caveat for ski like socks is they typically run on the tighter side. So, for a survival challenge like Alone, probably not the best if you're restricting blood flow that is probably already decreased because most people are dehydrated. And we're going to talk about that as well. All right. And we're moving on to Wyatt. So, Wyatt has his fishing setup over here, and he takes quite some time to get that ice off, and it is a precarious situation. And I think he did the right thing. Like, if he let it freeze anymore, he would have lost his net. So really cool that he was able to do it. And again, it shows you that sometimes the benefit of the boots, you really got to do what you would rather have, because he slips and I think his one of his foot dunks into the cold water, and he has a rubberized boot, so he probably didn't get wet from that. So not a big deal for him. And we see him bashing in with a stick, doesn't really work. He uses a rock and was able to get his net back. We're coming on at day 55. Again, 7 degrees, getting closer to that minus 20. One thing that I'm really curious about, this is Alan. So Alan's here with his parka, which I love. I have my parka over here. And one thing that most people should modify on their coats, it's not that expensive. One hack to do is go to your thrift store and find a coat that has some kind of real fur on it, or at least synthetic that has a lot of loft. So I got this from the thrift store, this fur part, and I just sewed it in. And what that does is it allows you to shrink this hole up, have that small area of exposure, and it traps in a lot of the heat, the heated air around your face closer to your mouth and to your face. So that adds on a whole lot of heat. A second modification that I would do is, if there's not kind of wool on the inside of your hood or some kind of thing that insulates it, put that in, because that will add so much heat inside your hood. And this is like an oversized hood for a military parka. And these guys on eBay are not super expensive. And they have huge pockets meant for like military magazines. And I just kept a lot of my snaring stuff in there, my extra food. I was putting like full squirrels in my magazine pouches, which became pretty useful. And one thing that I did do to modify this is, you can see that there's a little bit of a glisten to this. And this is a tedious task, especially if you're doing this yourself, which I did. Was I put a very thin, I think it was maybe 2 layers of wax. So wax allows it to be a little more durable, a little more water resistant. And I knew if it was a wet and cold environment, if this got wet, I would have been in not a good shape. So I water not proofed it, but made it slightly more water resistant. And I found that it did help beat off a lot of the water, and it actually made it easier to dry as well, which was a nice added benefit. Now, one kind of flip is that if you put too much wax, it becomes pretty like papery, really crinkly. And that may not bother you, but it isn't necessarily the most comfortable, especially if it's a layer that's close to your skin. So my rain jacket's like that, not the most comfortable, but you can break it in. Another option is, I think it's called Snow Glow or something like that. I will remember it and I'll put it in the comments. But it is kind of like a petroleum based kind of boot waterproofing material, and I put some of that on the hood, and that worked really really well. So one of the things that Alan does over here is he's making firewood, but his logs are pretty tiny, and is like sawing a lot of different logs to that size. And I'm curious if it was because his fireplace was super small, or if he didn't want to use longer things, because you can save a lot of work if you're just using bigger pieces and processing less. In addition to that, one of the things that I found super helpful when processing wood, because I only brought an axe, is just cutting it a half to maybe 2/3 deep, and then using fulcrum from 2 trees to snap it. So I would put kind of jam it in between 2 trees and then put it on my hips, walk forward, and it would snap. And I would kind of pre-cut multiple different segments on a branch or a tree that I wanted to cut. And after I was done, I would just wedge it in between trees and snap, snap, snap. I would have my firewood for the day. So that was my way to overcome not having a saw, but still maintaining that low calorie output for firewood. Now you can do the same thing with saws. It's even better with saws. So if you saw it kind of 2/3 and then snap it, what happens is that oftentimes it snaps pretty clean. So you have that exposed dry wood area that's ready to go in your fire to make your fire sticks, to make your feather sticks rather, and also to be a nice kind of base layer because that open face dry wood is on the top where you're starting your kindling. All right, and then we see him make snowshoes for the ice, which is always a good idea. I love that Alan, throughout all that he's done over here, typically does something that's effective and that is simple. So we saw that in his shelter and him having it up within the day and not expending a whole lot of energy. And this snowshoe setup is pretty quick. So quick and dirty allows him to expand kind of the surface area. One of the things that I probably would have done if the snow was deeper. So when we're thinking about 3 feet plus. One of the issues with walking on snow is that there's snow layers and then like little frozen layers as well. And typically, if you don't have snowshoes or big enough snowshoes, you punch through those layers and it becomes so burden, such a burden and energy waste if you're punching through, lifting up, punching through, lifting up. So if it was deep winter, I would have probably made that snowshoe or that improvised snowshoe ski type of deal about 2 times as long and maybe just a wee wider. So sometimes I'm using 5 to 6 branches to make it a little bit wider and definitely a little bit longer. But for the environment that they're in right now, the snow is it looks like it's just only a few inches high, and is mainly using it for safety on ice. I think that's a really good option. One thing that Mikey, we see Mikey over here, and Mikey's commenting on seeing ice on the inside of his shelter. And that's one of the reasons why I advocated for layers upon layers upon layers, because not only are you trapping kind of heat inside your shelter, you're kind of making sure that moisture doesn't fall back on you. So one of the biggest thing on Alone in season 9, because it was such a wet season, is even though you had a waterproof roof over your head, the moisture on the inside was so much that it was collecting on side of inside of the tarp and then dropping down on us. So having a layer on the inside, I used pine tree boughs, and then I had an inside tarp that was just a few feet on top of my face to kind of capture that heat as well. And a lot of these shelters are pretty open, so a lot of heat can get lost there, and it's difficult to warm up. So we're seeing some of the ramifications for these setups. And let's move on to toes. So frostbite on the toes. What should you do? So if you have frostbite, if you have frostbite, or if you think you're having frostbite, things that can happen is number one, pain. It can be painful. It can feel numb. It can feel tingly. It can be swollen. And sometimes when you're really focused on something, you might know that your feet are a little uncomfortable. Then it gets numb, and then you're doing something and you forget about it. What happens is a lot of these contestants and a lot of people, when they think they're getting cold, they go in and out. So they go in their shelter, warm up, go out, freeze it again, go in to their shelter, freeze it again, and go back and forth. That is a sure way to get cold injury. What happens is something similar to reperfusion injury, which happens when you kind of put on a tourniquet, turn it off, put on a tourniquet, turn it off. Same thing goes with cold injuries as well, because sometimes those small itty bitty blood vessels in your toes and fingers, if they freeze up, it's similar to it not having blood flow because it's not flowing because it's cold or it's slowed down or they're too vasoconstricted. And those blood vessels are so kind of thin that blood has a trouble going in and out. So when you warm it up, it opens up, blood flows, and then again, when you go out again, it closes up and then causes injury. What happens with the cells is they die faster. So when it dies faster, you'll notice a transition between not only color, but also sensation. So it will go from uncomfortable to when you rewarm it, painful to then it becomes numb no matter what you do. Then it might change color to darker and darker and darker. Now that's scary because even though you might not amputate it, that cold injury can affect the nerves for the long term. We see the same thing for people like Callie, who still has some sensitivities to cold. So that's why at the get go, you want to make sure that you have the right equipment for your toes. But if you don't, know how to improvise those layers. So it may be the case as, okay, if my boot isn't insulated enough, how am I going to insulate it more? Am I going to wrap the toe box if my toes are cold? Am I going to open up and loosen up my boot straps because it's too tight? Am I going to um, figure out what I can do to lay a platform down when I'm ice fishing so that my toes aren't on the ice. So one of the biggest thing is when we're kneeling down doing something, our toes are directly on the ice with a very thin layer of insulation, just our toe box there. And it typically that's the thing that gets a lot of people. So if you have a platform, whether that's a bed of moss or a bed of pine tree boughs, at least you have something protecting you from that direct contact. So if your boots aren't warm enough, figure out how to adjust that boot configuration or add insulation layers on top. We see in a lot of survival books, people doing wraps of insulative material and then waterproof material on top of their boots. We see a lot of that in the traditional moccasins and how that's designed as well, and making your environment a little more favorable to your frost injuries. So what else we got? So unfortunately, Mikey can't get warm enough, and he is seeing kind of outcomes of these cold injuries, and it's a big deal. You know, he is one of the main providers for his family. He wants to be in it for his kid Nikolai, and if you guys want to donate to him, Luke is an awesome guy, and he is hosting a GoFundMe for Mikey. And I'm trying to get a bunch of different organizations who deal with autistic children involved as well. So if you want to donate to Mikey, I'll put in the links in my description on my YouTube so you can donate to his cause because he's a great guy. He pushed really hard. And if you looked at some of the beginning episodes and my commentary on the beginning episodes, even though there were people like Luke and these really amazing people, not saying Mikey isn't amazing, I knew Mikey would have pushed super far because of his reason to do so. And I'm really proud of him. So go support Mikey if you can, if you're in a position to. And if you're not in a position to donate, tag everyone, anyone who works for an autistic organization, and maybe we can get him hooked up with some education and training and support. That would be life changing for his kid. All right. So, what do we got next? We got some pictures of the environment, how cold it is for Mikey, and Wyatt's setup. So Wyatt, his setup for his safety, that ladder, great idea. Again, we're expanding that surface area, so if we do fall, we have a bunch of surface area to break our fall. Um, I like how these guys have the opportunity to ice fish and jig. I've always wanted to do that. I'm hoping I get a chance to do that up here in Maine. Oh, I see someone, a Facebook user, mentioning the seal that I use on my hood, on my parka hood, snow seal. Love the stuff. Would buy tons of it. So if you don't have a snow seal and you've never used it on your boot, try it out. Works great on leather. Works great on material as well. Cotton material to be specific. So we see Wyatt here again. His glove system. I'm not sure if he has his gloves inside of his mitts. If he is, he's in a pretty good shape. Even those look fairly big. It may not have been big enough to do that dual system. In extreme cold environments, we're talking about minus 100. You typically have 3 layers. So on top of that, there are some companies that have a waterproof layer, kind of like a rain jacket that goes over that mitt. That's a three-tiered layer. So if you wanna go that cold, you would want multiple layers, at least those 2 layers. And we see his boots, for the I think one of the first times, that I think it's a Baffin model, but it has an insert, which I'm partial to. So again, we're day 57. Alan's here talking about his orange urine. We're talking about dehydration. Dehydration is a big one in cold environments because you don't know, number one, your thirst response as well as warm environments. And number two, you pee more. So there's something called cold diuresis. And you find this if you've ever camped in cold environments, you typically pee in the middle of the night multiple times a night. And that's a telltale sign that maybe your shelter or your sleeping system isn't the warmest. But also, it gives you a little hint that you should be drinking a lot more. So, people like the people on alone should be drinking at least 2 to 3 liters if they're not doing anything. But from a protein standpoint, because they're eating basically their muscles right now because they're not getting a whole lot of food, that has a lot of ammonia breakdown products. And that can cause you to be loopy. That can cause some systemic issues. So sometimes the solution to pollution is dilution. And you want to be diluting that as well, not to an extreme amount where you get low sodium levels, but at least 3 liters a day. And we can see that some people who've been off the show for medical reasons have heart palpitations or heart kind of sensation changes. And oftentimes it's a combination of electrolyte deficiencies, underlying conditions, but also dehydration. I would say the majority of people, including myself out there, even though I was drinking about 3 liters a day, are more on the dehydrated side. So, orange urine, not the best, but at least it's not brown. Once you see brown, that's typically damage with like cell death, and you're getting that muddy brown layer in your urine. Not a good sign. If you're getting red urine, that's typically related to muscle breakdown, or if you're having blood in that system. Hopefully, no one ever gets a kidney stone out there because that hurts like heck. Right. One interesting thing that I saw from Alan is that he was placing moss over his hole, and there was a little commentary that said the components of moss, and I'm thinking like reindeer moss, but maybe it's different for this type of moss, has a component of antifreeze in it. Now, I have a few kind of questions about that kind of thought process. I do think like moss can insulate the area so it doesn't freeze as well, similar to snow. They don't have a thick layer of snow, so this might be the best option to have a thick layer of insulation. But if you're using it with the intention of saying like it makes this antifreeze thing, you're putting it in a lake. So it immediately gets diluted quite significantly unless it magically floats to the top or stays near the surface. So I'm very curious about that chemistry. If anyone wants to do some research and put in the comments, then we can talk about it on our next session. So no one's getting a success with fishing, and unfortunately, people get cold. And Wyatt over here um, says that his toenail just came off. And yes, with the deficiencies with cold injuries, especially with vascular issues, things like that can happen. And it is a sign that maybe we should pay a little more attention to our feet and maybe adjust our footwear as well. So I'm not sure if he had any trauma to that area or if it was just cold, but his toes, he was saying, was so numb that he wasn't able to feel that it kind of scraped off, which is a little concerning. Fortunately, Wyatt also has a fire. I think this is his second time that he has fire on the inside of his shelter, and he's able to take it off or put it out because he has a bucket there. If he didn't, and he only had that 2 quart bucket that may have been frozen, that would have been a hard situation. And I think the combination of not getting fish, shelter, catching a flame, and honestly, it's a risk and it happens. There were embers in mine at some point, so it does happen. Even though you kind of clay it out and have a chimney and all that, it still does happen because everything becomes super dry in that area, and it just takes one ember to flash fire that setup. And I think this was one of the final straws for Wyatt, where the waves and the winds just takes away that fishing spots, and he kind of loses hope that he can get more food, which is reasonable for anyone. And one of the things I wanted to mention because of this setup, and I really do like talking about this, is what is your layering system for your head? How can you keep your head as warm as possible in cold environments? And I will show you what I got. And my setup, I knew that it would probably be not as cold as I use this for because I'm used to like minus 40 and below Celsius. But I knew the setup would keep me super toasty. And if all I use this hat for is my nightcap, then fine. So I have this guy. It is fox and a quilted insulated wool on the inside, super warm, and it has a foxtail over here, which I use as an additional scarf as well. And the cool thing about this is the ears come down, just like a lot of headgear, but it's super long, so this wraps around me almost completely, and it allows to trap in a lot of heat. So I only wore this maybe 2 or 3 times on the coldest days on Alone Season 9 because of how hot this was. Now, if you're not doing that, one of the things that I do recommend is having kind of a layered system where it's fleece on the inside, kind of a wool beanie on the outside, and then combining that with a neck warmer. So I really like the old Canadian military ones. They have a little bit, I'm not sure if you can see this, but a little bit of a mesh right here where your mouth can go. And that allows you to comfortably put everything over your nose and expose as little as possible. On Alone, we can't wear any goggles. That would be the best because everything would be covered. Your whole face would be covered. But I noticed that Wyatt's setup, he had two buffs. Maybe it was a fleece on the one that he was wearing as a head. But again, your scalp releases a lot of heat. And he basically had a big old hole over there. So his choice of a leather cap at the beginning may not have done him justice in the end when he was really cold, because I would have chosen maybe a wool beanie or a fleece beanie over that. I personally brought wool. I think it was a merino wool cash cap from Wazoo. I have the links in my description if you want to take a look. And this, and the combination of this, that beanie, plus this, in the coldest, I was toasty, even when I was losing 60 something pounds. One thing that I wish was allowed on Alone was a balaclava, because this, in my opinion, this combination plus like a fleece on top, plus like a wool, like that's the thing that I use in the military to keep me warm at all times. So I really like that, and it integrates well with your oversized hoodie because you can use all of that, and it's basically a shelter in what you're wearing, and you can really be out fishing for a long time and not feel cold in the slightest. So that's a little bit about my stuff. We're running really far behind. I got too excited about the gear. I have my sleeping or my snow bibs that I really love. Alan has it. They are the best bibs that I've had to date, and highly recommend. They're on the pricier side, but it's basically like packing a sleeping bag, and it has a removable inner liner. Check it out. It's one of the most excited gear choices that I brought on Alone Season 9. I think anyone who loves ice fishing should get it. So with that, let's talk about questions. Thank you. And thank you for people who supported the channel. Thank you for people reaching out to get the t-shirts. I have only smalls available. So if you have a kid or if you fit a small and want a shirt, want to support this channel, you are the only reason why I got this new camera lens and am able to produce better visually quality stuff for you guys. So thank you. Sorry I had to be away. ER has been kicking my butt, but I think my shifts are starting to be a little more organized now and more predictable, which is nice. What is the difference between an oral thermometer versus a rectal thermometer? Is it just the taste? So that's a hilarious question. For regular day-to-day things, if you have a kid or if you have a fever, typically rectal temperatures are the most accurate. Armpits and those guns that look at your forehead, not as accurate. So if you are thinking, oh, my kid or I feel a little bit warm, you take it in the armpit or in the mouth, and you're, oh, it's not necessarily a fever. Chances are, if you take a rectal temperature, it will be a fever. But specific to this case, for severe hypothermia, you can be in a comatose state. And to grade the hypothermia, even though they're in a comatose state, and I wouldn't really change management, is an esophageal thermometer where it goes deep down inside your throat, and you check the temperature there. And those are more accurate because the typical thermometer doesn't go as low as how low the human body can go in severe hypothermia. So we have one tip over here. If you are going to use your parka as an additional layer to your sleeping system, layer it on the top of it to bolster that up. I would agree with that. At the very least, it doesn't get the moisture inside of your sleeping bag because like you're going to sweat. I almost guarantee that you're going to sweat with a parka inside a sleeping bag that's meant for at least minus 30 because you're on alone and you're going to get at least a minus 30 bag. So definitely more partial towards that technique. Thinking about the alone underwear, I still fit it. Love that. Ooh, so we have Kamek boots. I've never worked or used Kamek boots before, but I will check that out and hopefully they'll send me a pair. That's awesome. Yeah. So what happens when your feet sweats in a cold and insulated environment? It gets cold. So there's that cold water or from the sweat sucks away that heat and just worsens that process. So that's one of the reasons why boots that you can dry off on a regular basis. And if they allowed exchangeable liners, typically in the military, you always bring your second liner. So you have one that's drying, one that's dry, and you always have a dry pair to go with. I know Kai from season 7 makes mucklucks, and when she's on her expeditions, she actually wears those mucklucks. And even though sometimes they get wet, you're able to dry out those inner liners really well. And even the material that those mucklucks are made of dry fairly easily. Snow seal is the thing. Yep, sometimes people don't know the exact year to use. People are coming from all over the place. Like we got Hawaii, we got like some southern places, some mountainous places, and it's all based on experience, right? So it for me, I would say some of my equipment are not the things that are the the expert of Labrador would recommend. Like my parka, not made for wet and cold environments, but it's something that I was very familiar with, something that I trusted, something that felt like an old friend. So I brought it anyways. Could that have been a fatality for me? Well, the zippers broke like when it started to snow, so that wasn't the best. But luckily, there's a lot of systems within these parkas to make sure things button up properly. So super lucky in that regard. Yes, everyone donate to Mikey. Main prepper, who are you? And please DM me, please on my Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Let's meet up because I am near Portland and I have no friends here. Yes, hard to see the color of your urine. One thing that you should look at is urinary frequency as well. So if you didn't pee all day, that probably means that you're not drinking enough. For women, sometimes when they pee too much, that can be an infection. Same thing for men, but typically more so in women. But pee frequency can also give you some tips as well. Do they have gloves that give better dexterity? So that's why I like having cross country gloves because typically those people are moving and grooving, and those are some of the gloves that people use for triathlons, or I think they're called triathlons. The ones where you're skiing and shooting, that's typically what they use. Either that or gloves that kind of come out and you can use your fingers. But ideally, and I challenge everyone to do this, is practice tying knots and doing things with gloves on because it's helpful. So you're reducing your exposure. What happens when you expose your fingers to cold and then warm, then cold and warm, is your fingers actually get swollen. And when it gets swollen, the nail pops off from the bed, and that can be very painful. Uh, Quick fix: a little bit of Vaseline so it's not exposed to the oxygen, and then wrap it with some tape. Make sure it's not too tight and the color is still pink and nice, and that fixes that. But you want to reduce your exposure to the cold as much as possible. One of it is learning how to work with your gloves, and another is learning how to tie knots with your thumbs because then you can do it with your mitts. It's a fun exercise, I promise. Is there a difference between if someone taps out, then medically removed in terms of heading home afterwards? So, in regards to, let's say, refeeding protocol and all that, everything's kind of standardized. So, whether you leave on your own volition or get pulled, if you need medical attention, you get your medical attention. If you need to go to the hospital, you need to go to the hospital, pending weather and transportation. But it doesn't make you go home physically home faster or slower. That's cool. So we have some people with some Korean War era parkas with some wolf ruffs. I have my parka over here that I got after a loan that's caribou with wool on the inside, and it's so beautiful. It's one of my most prized possessions. Have I had time to enjoy the summer? No, not entirely. I've been to some beaches in Maine, but there's a shed out back, a two-floor shed that needs siding and has water damage, and I need to fix it. And there's no contractors out here, so I'm working on that. Yes. So if you guys get value from this, if you are learning things, if you have fun talking to me and me answering your questions, I'm going to be doing this outside of alone as well. So if you have topics, current events, accidents that happen, videos that seem kind of iffy, send them to me. I'm going to be doing at least a video a week that are live like this and answering questions as well in regards to that topic and maybe a little bit outside that topic too. So if you like that and you want to continue this after this Alone Season 10 experience, then feel free to subscribe and click that notification. Crisco. Yes, Crisco seems cheap. I wonder the different oils because I know some oils, biological oils, have different shelf times to it too. But if it works, it works. All right. Any other questions, queries, personal things? I am about to edit some video for you guys on the short form. So, super excited about launching my online book. I've been working on it for quite some time now. Added on at least 50 to 70 pages from my first iteration and my second iteration. That's going to be available sometime in September. If you guys want to be the first to see it, I am taking 24 people to kind of read it, give me feedback, and kind of get it ready for the public eye. So if you want that, just DM me book, whether that's on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram. Just let me know if you want to read it. All right, guys. Thank you so much for supporting, for watching, for being here live. It's super awesome that you guys do that. Ooh, are you still doing an online medical training course this fall? Okay, so this is for everyone who are here. So the 23 of you that are here, and if you are the 23 that keeps on showing up to these lives, I really hope that you're the 23 that show up for this online event because I'm doing this $1,000 course, including my book, including my time, including all the nitty gritties for free. So I'm only taking 24 students because that's all that I can handle right now. And we're going to go over the whole course. I want your honest feedback. And if it kicks ass, it kicks ass. Leave a killer review. And that's all I want. I want your honest feedback and a review. And if you are interested in learning survival medicine and learning all the survival things that I know and learning all the relevant medical things that I think you need to know to save a life in the field, then let me know by direct email, by Facebook, by anything, and just mention course in the subject title. So I respond to almost all of my Instagram DMs. And if you want to reach me directly and you don't have Instagram or anything like that, email Teimojin@survivaldoctors.com. So I want you guys to have the seats because you guys show up and I love you for that. So hopefully I can see you there. All right, coffee enthusiasts and remnant apothecary and remedies. Awesome. Please, main prepper, apothecary, and coffee enthusiasts. I want to see you guys sign up. Please be the first people to do that because once I announce it on my Instagram or YouTube, I think people are just going to fill out those seats. And I want you guys who show up to these lives to get it first. So, with that, have a great Monday night. I hope work was awesome, and we'll see you next week.